Tomorrow evening, we are going to have industry insiders starting at 7 o'clock. It's rising to the challenge of a market in turbulence. We have an all-star lineup of folks. We hope you will join us 7 o'clock. Check your email for the login information. It should be a great opportunity for you to grab some little nuggets for the work that you do every single day. We have folks who have been through the ups and downs of the past, and we're going to learn from those men and women so that you can carry that forward as we go forward with the challenges that we have in our marketplace. GPAR folks, thank you very much for all the questions that you sent in to us. We had an overwhelming response. We have them queued up with our questions for the mayor. Joining the mayor today is also the deputy mayor for planning and development, Ann Fedulin. Ann, thank you. You joined us earlier during this pandemic. You were an awesome, awesome guest. That was a pretty great exchange, an hour-long back and forth. You didn't shy away from the tough questions. We appreciated your honesty. You were awesome. Hopefully you're still getting out and moving around, and we know your workday goes from probably 5 until 5, right? AM to AM. And then also too, we have Jim Engler, the mayor's chief of staff, a veteran inside of City Hall. He'll be also here to help us out with fielding any of the questions. So the mayor is well suited with folks who, if he doesn't have the direct answer to or the specific detail, he has the folks that can help him out with that. So with that, I hand it over to our president, Stephanie Biello.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Mr. Mayor Kenney.
Hello.
How are you?
Been better.
So I think we are good. We can hear you. Yes. So how are you personally handling the new normal?
There's really no playbook for this. Even back in 2008, which was a terrible financial time, you didn't have it coupled with a pandemic and a terrible medical catastrophe. You didn't have to set up hospital medical hospitals and surge hospitals in a gym in a university gymnasium. You didn't have to deal with homeless 150 homeless people at the airport and putting under contract 3 hotels to deal with people getting put into quarantine, first responders needing to quarantine themselves. There's a lot of different things that we didn't see coming, and it came really quickly. I think by, I guess, early March, it started end of February, early March started to flare. When we got up around St. Patrick's Day, with the cancellation of the parade, which was a good move, because if you remember back in 1918, they had a large parade right around the time of that flu, and 12,000 people wound up dying in the city. We're over 1,000 people now, and the caseload seems to be slowing down, not to the point where we're totally comfortable, because you don't know. And what I see on television around the country is just astonishing, that people are congregating the way they're congregating, not only in Philadelphia, but in the center of the country and around these lakes and pools and beaches. I'm really concerned that come September, October, November, that we might be back in the soup again. And that would be really sad, because the wearing of masks and some of the social distancing stuff that some people complain about to the point of ridiculousness is the thing that's really working. And I know there's a number of institutions throughout the country and the world looking for a vaccine or for antibodies to treat or to end this situation. But I'm really concerned about the fall. We're slowly emerging under control. We've had to work with our surrounding counties, which is also kind of similar population density. We have parts of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that are, have more deer than people, so they didn't get hit with the crisis as bad as we did, or areas like New York City and New York State. So there's a lot of political wrangling as to when we should open up and get back to quote unquote normal. I don't think we're ever going to have a total normal situation again. I think for a number of years we're going to be dealing with protecting ourselves from this until there's a vaccine. And it's been tough. We've had to make some really serious decisions when it comes to our budget. Back in 2009, it was a $150 million problem. We have a $650 million problem. The bulk of that is being dealt with cuts and layoffs. which we really don't want to do, but there's really no choice. And some of it's being assured of a small amount of it, $50 million out of the 650 is being dealt with revenue enhancements, which includes a proposed real estate tax for schools and non-resident wage tax increase and freezing of the wage and business reductions. You know, we're just doing it. We're doing our best. Every day is different. And you look at every day, I want to see those numbers, the new case numbers and the deaths, and they seem to be going in the right direction. So knock wood, we're slowly moving out of it.
Yeah, let's hope those numbers continue to go down. So let's talk a little bit about the channel of communication between the city of Philadelphia and the state and the federal governments. How is that communication between them?
No, the president's a trip, I can tell you that. Why he insists on sending mixed messages, I have no idea. The whole mask issue is really ridiculous. And it's become this kind of culture war now that those who wear masks are somehow not courageous, and those who don't wear masks are patriots. And the president continues to create that divide, which is really hard. The governor has been the opposite. The governor has been helpful and thoughtful and is moving with data. We don't always agree totally because we have, again, surrounding counties that have different viewpoints from us, and also our proximity to New Jersey, you know, creates another set of considerations based on what Governor Murphy wants to do or is doing. And then you have the situation like this weekend with the people going to the Jersey Shore because they either are used to doing that Memorial Day weekend or they own a home there, and then they come back. So I don't know what kind of exposure our residents are having at a place like the beach, and then coming back on Monday night or Tuesday morning, potentially infected and potentially spreading. So I think from a state and regional perspective, we've done really well with cooperative attitudes and cooperation. The federal government's been a disaster, with the exception of some of the legislation that got passed by Congress on PPP and the CARES Act. We need another round of something to keep this economy afloat. But the messaging coming out of the White House has just been bad, and we're doing our best to weather that. I think we've actually I think the University of Pennsylvania has taken a survey that 80% of the people or so who they surveyed, all adults, agree that wearing a mask and social distancing and those things are important and good for all of us to move away from this problem. So that gives me some hope. I think social media is horrible. It's one of the worst inventions I think ever in this country's history. It is the place where people go to be mean and be anonymous, and it's really hurtful and harmful. And it's also a place where incorrect news gets promulgated in the worst way possible. So all that being said, I'm proud of all of our city employees. I know trash has been a little delayed with pickup, but they're working hard and they're scared. A lot of those guys don't want to come to work, but they come anyway. You look at people who are driving buses and running mass transit, firefighters, police officers. I don't know how our nurses and doctors and hospital staff find the courage to run into what's basically was a burning building every day for work, and then have to worry about their own families. So, I mean, I think some of the best in people are coming out and some of the worst in people are coming out, but I guess that's normal in a situation like this.
I guess that would be my next question. How are those city departments managing the logistics and the technology challenges?
Well, we're actually, everybody's under attack now because in addition to the pandemic, in addition to the financial crisis, you have people that are trying to hack into your systems, and we're constantly on edge and worried about that and fighting that off. Our IT people are ever alert. Our operating departments have been pretty good. That's why we wanted to do a 1-year contract extension with our union, so we didn't have to negotiate and debate their contracts during the course of the summer, which would have potentially created some animosity or whatever. So we got a year extension there, so that's calmed down to a degree. And our police and fire are set. Senate, our district council 33 are blue collar workers, and district council 47 are white collar workers, all contracts now. They're doing their best every day. It's just tough, and there's no precedent for it. So there's no book to read or playbook to go from.
Right. Okay. So the governor shared his strategy with reopening in the states in terms of red, yellow, and green. Where is the city at in terms of reopening under the governor's orders, and what more do we have to do?
Well, we're moving towards the yellow. We had some concerns. We expressed those concerns, but we're moving as a region together, and I think that's important that we stick together. The governor has told me and told us that if we moving towards green and we don't feel we're ready, certainly we can slow up a little bit before we get there. I'm just concerned about people not wanting to follow the common sense rules. But we're on track to move into yellow on June 5th.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit, let's go back to the funding, the PPP and the CARES Act and all. Are there any funding streams coming into Philadelphia? And how does that all work?
I think, and Engler, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we got $279 million out of the CARES Act. PPP doesn't really affects us because it's more for business, both large and small. And it's seemingly that large businesses got the bulk of it. I don't know why, but apparently that was the case. We're hiring a firm and working with our finance and budget people to figure out on the recovery all the money we need to get reimbursed, what's reimbursable, what's not reimbursable, and we're on track to go after as much as is humanly possible from the federal government and state government on reimbursement.
Yeah, so we had just to give some clarity to that. So the CARES Act provided a little over $270 million to the mayor's point to the city for COVID-related expenses that weren't already budgeted. So those dollars are available to us, and we're going through a process now of determining what we can allocate for governmental expenses, what can go to other community-based expenses, and trying to track that. All of that money has to be spent by December 31st, and it cannot be used to cover lost revenue. So the largest portion of our deficit is caused by lost revenue, and the funding that we've received so far can't be used towards that. I think Ann Fadulin can also talk to some of the additional resources we received through the CARES Act for the Community Development Block Grant, as well as some other funding sources if the members would be interested in that.
Okay, I think we do have some questions about the budget, but while we're on the reopening, I just want to quickly talk about the educational institutions in Philadelphia. And is there any talk of the students going back in-person classes? The colleges, will they continue to be virtual? The housing market, all the restaurants, shops, how is that affected? Do you see anything going into the yellow?
I don't, my personal opinion is that schools will not start back the way they were. I think a lot will be virtual. Community colleges already announced it's going to be virtual. The other major institutions, major colleges and universities, I don't think have made a clear-cut decision yet. I think they're still trying to analyze the risks and what they have to do to socially distance and how classes would be conducted. My guess is that by September, I don't know if they'll be ready. And I don't know. I mean, people ask me these questions, and I really wish I knew an exact date as to when things were going to get normal. But I don't personally think that universities will be ready. I think there might be possibility that the school district with corrections and different methods might be ready to do something come September, but I don't know yet. I mean, if Jim or Ann have an opinion, I'd like to hear, please feel free.
Yeah, so we don't have an answer for that. We are convening the university presidents to talk about reopening. I know each of the universities have been working on their own plans. To the mayor's point, CCP has announced that they'll be starting the next semester virtually. we're going to work with universities to figure out how the city can be supportive of their reopening plans in the best way possible. But the bottom line, they're going to be worried about protecting their students. And we want to work with them to make sure that we provide whatever support we can to make sure that they're protected. And if that means that, for the start of the semester, they'll be virtual, or there's some type of virtual component to all of their classes, whatever we can do to be supportive, we will. But those talks are ongoing.
Yeah.
As far as restaurants, and I think restaurants are probably going to be restaurants and bars are probably going to be last to get to the point where we want to see them back again. There's a possibility there may be outdoor dining, especially in the warm months, that has not been determined yet, but is seemingly a possibility. We've loosened up on ordering. You could now walk up to a restaurant and order without having to call it in or go on a computer. And we ask people to socially distance. Don't let people of more than 10 in a group line up outside the restaurant. Keep your spacing. Wear the masks, and those kinds of things. So it's getting there. But again, I don't know what effect all of this craziness that you've seen over the weekend is going to have come the next couple of months.
Okay, so let's talk about, while we're still on that subject, city pools will be closed for the summer. So obviously this is a health. Is it also a money issue too?
No, it wasn't a money issue as much as it was an administrative issue. We had 800 lifeguards that we had to interview, vet, get their background checks. There weren't people around to do that. And that we couldn't figure out how to socially distance in a pool where people were swimming in close contact with each other. So we decided that it was more administrative than it was anything else, but it wasn't necessarily a matter of money. If someone were to give us the amount of money to open up the pools, we wouldn't have the time to do it because that process, if you throw in the state requirements on background checks due to working with kids, it would take us, we wouldn't have the time to do it. So we're hopefully going to open next year. We are looking at cooling opportunities on streets and in spray parks and the like. Hopefully we can get kids cooled off in the summer, but the pools will not be open.
Is there anything that we as realtors can help with that?
We have our recreation department is doing a Play Street operation citywide. We were soliciting donations for that. As a matter of fact, the YMCA just contributed $250,000 to the Play Street program. So what we're hoping to do is in many streets in all of our neighborhoods to have adults and others and recreation staff cordon off the streets, traffic, perhaps get some water spray opportunities for them to stay cool, and to have organized activities for kids to keep them on track for their schoolwork and other things coming to September. So
that's the Play Street program? And
yeah, we can, what I'll do is offline, I can send you the information, or
sure.
Matt, and put you in touch with Catherine Ottlevel. I'm sure you know the Recreation Commissioner. She's running the program along with the Department of Human Services.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so now we have some questions from the members, and I'm gonna have Matt go through those. They were sent in to Matt. So go ahead, Matt.
Hey, Mr. Mayor. So we're going to get a little bit more into the budget, and I'm sure that Ann or Jim could help us out with some of this stuff. So in March, you go before City Council, you present one budget, and then boom, a pandemic comes into play. Could you explain a little bit more about how that big donut hole got created? What are those revenues that we're missing out on, and how is that?
Let me tell you where we were when this was a very ambitious budget that was going to hopefully address a lot of issues facing the city that had faced the city long term. We had the highest fund balance in the city's history going into this budget cycle. We had put money in the rainy day fund for the first time in the rainy day fund's existence. We have higher pension costs because we had our unions and the last go around agree to put more money into their pension fund. So we had to put more money in there also. But we were in good financial shape. Our bond rating was solid. We were moving in a positive direction. And then revenue just basically stopped. I mean, businesses closed down. The city closed down. It was a stay-at-home order. There's the revenues just dried up. I mean, liquor by the drink, for example, for the schools, I think it was bringing in 80 or $90 million a year, went to zero. Use and occupancy taxes, people couldn't pay their, we had to extend everything as the federal and state government did, extending things to the mid-July. But Jim, if you go through just some of the other details.
Sure. So to the mayor's point, the largest piece of our deficit is really that lost revenue from just about all of our revenue sources. We delayed filing deadlines and payment deadlines for real estate tax, for BERT, for all of our major taxes. And we also have increased expenses. So for whether it's our things for the response, which we think the federal government funds will be able to reimburse, but also to the mayor's point around higher pension payments, because as the stock market took a tumble, it's been better recently, but as it took its initial tumble, the pension funds liabilities grew. So all of those things went into the $650 million deficit that we were faced with and forced us to make those revisions to the budget. And Matt, I'm sure you're going to want to talk about the ways that we filled that $650 million hole. So I don't know if you want to jump right into that, or if you want to
Yeah, so
go through the questions.
I'm sure you guys probably had some very deliberative process on a very short timeline. I was wondering if you guys could walk us through that. Was there a process of like identifying what was touchable, what was untouchable? We just talk about that with sports, touchable and untouchable players. Obviously, you probably did that with different departments and programs and whatnot. Could you guys walk us through a little bit of that process that you guys did to kind of narrow stuff down?
Jim, why don't you handle it?
Sure. So we really started with the premise that knowing in this new reality, we couldn't do everything. We wanted to keep Philadelphians safe, healthy, and educated. That was really our core focus. And we wanted to focus on several other areas. We wanted to make sure that we learned from the mistakes of the last recession. One of the things from the last recession that we learned was that cuts to public safety departments really take years to recover from, whether it was brownouts in the fire department or station closures or skipping classes in the police department. It really takes years to recover from those losses. We also wanted to learn from the decision that was made in the last recession to try and close libraries and to close pools, and that Philadelphians really care about their civic infrastructure. And we didn't want to close pools and close libraries or recreation centers. And we wanted to try and capitalize on some of the efficiencies that were able to be found by this new reality. So with everyone working from home, or the vast majority of our workforce working remotely, were there ways that we could reduce costs and save some funds to do that? So with filling that, the budget deficit, we went through a process. We drew down all of the reserves that we could, whether that was, to the mayor's point, that first payment that we made to the rainy day fund, drawing down on what had been our previous fund balance, and then really looking hard at what we could afford to do. There were many programs that we really liked, that we wanted to continue, that we just knew we couldn't afford in this current crisis. And we also looked at programs that we thought could be funded through other means. So whether that was federal funds that were coming into the city, whether that was philanthropic resources that we knew we could solicit for, areas where we could make cuts, that the programs could continue, but through other means. So that was the vast majority of the budget, is about $350 million in cuts. To your point, Matt, there really were no departments that were untouchable. Every department took some type of reduction from the budget that was proposed, and some were in some cases either completely eliminated or almost completely eliminated. The Office of City Representative as a standalone budget office was eliminated. There's a couple positions that will stay and be shifted into the mayor's office, but otherwise was eliminated. The Office of Arts and Culture was eliminated as a standalone budget office. Some functions and positions will be retained in the managing director's office, but otherwise eliminated. And the Office of Workforce Development, which the work is going to be crucial, but a lot of that funding will flow through Philadelphia Works, which is our workforce investment board. A number of staff positions were cut, and those functions were actually shifted to the Commerce Department. So those cuts were the main bulk of it, drawing down our reserves, and cuts were the main bulk of how we resolved it. And then we were still left with about $50 million of need for the city. We looked at some fees that hadn't been raised in some time in L&I that we can do through regulation, as well as the commercial trash fee, which had not been raised in several years, and then looked at some revenue sources through taxes that we thought would cause the least amount of inequities. So we looked at the non-resident wage tax as a way to slightly close the gap between the non-resident and the resident wage tax as an opportunity, as well as the parking tax as an opportunity to raise some revenue. So those amount to really the smallest part of how we balance the budget, but we think are crucial to allow us to continue to provide even the reduced level of service that this budget provides for.
So that's a really good kind of quick rundown of that whole process and how you got into those different things. Appreciate that a lot, Jim. So obviously our folks care a lot about the real estate tax, looking at their clients, and the mission of our association is looking out for property owners' rights and advocating for those folks, even sometimes when they're not necessarily knocking on our door, but it's part of our mission to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that the loss of population, well, we've been gaining population in the city over the last decade, 2 decades. But the general loss of population back in the day, I think had to do with the inability to have an educational product that kept people here. So a lot of the people that I know that I grew up with who moved to New Jersey or to the counties moved because they didn't want to send their kids to school in Philadelphia, and it was understandable. Back in 2008, in that recession, schools took a major hit on just about every aspect. I mean, our kids are struggling. They're living in poverty, many of them. Their only way out is education. And I didn't want to be in a situation where we were going to slash education again. The proposed real estate tax at 3.9, whatever, just under 4, was all going to the schools to keep those programs intact so our kids would not slide backwards. Now, I recognize there's not a T word that anybody likes, and I totally understand it. But I also believe that our kids' future and potential reduction in poverty will only take place as a result of education. And our kids are doing better in just about every metric. I know the beverage tax is not popular either, but it's weird because the tax itself is not popular, but what it funds is extremely, extremely popular. Pre-K and our community school model and our rebuild program. And on pre-K, our kids are doing much better as a result of having a pre-K experience, ready for kindergarten, ready for first grade. And we've been unfunding or defunding education for a couple generations, and the result of it is a 24-point-something poverty rate. And that's really in a nutshell why we chose to recommend that, is because we don't want to see our kids sliding back again. And Harrisburg was not funding education. We had the school district taken over by the School Reform Commission 20 years ago, and with the promise that there were going to be more money coming to the schools, and we lost $1 billion in school funding over the period of time of the SRC's existence. So we decided that was the equitable way to go, and the most important thing we can do is educate our kids. Now, this budget has to go through council, which is going through now. If council decides that they don't want to do something or they want to do something different, as long as it makes sense and as long as it's not just phantom numbers that people are making up, I mean, we've had recommendations from some council members that we go back to 2018 funding levels. If we do that, you're going to lay off police and firefighters, because we have contracts with them and we have to abide by those contracts. So if we have to reduce those spending levels to 2018, we're going to have a reduction in police and fire department in on-street personnel. But you have to look when you're making recommendations other than what we've put forward. You're going to have to tell people what is going to have to go, not just that we're going back to 2018 funding levels. We're going to have X amount of police officers laid off, X amount of firefighters laid off, because that's going to be the result of doing something like that. So I'm open-minded to anything the council wants to do, as long as it makes sense and doesn't exacerbate the problems we're already facing.
And then Matt, if I could just add just one point about the real estate estate tax increase. We have been lobbying at both the state and federal level for additional funding for the school district. And if the Commonwealth if they're debating their budget now, if that budget number for the school district were to come in higher than previously anticipated, we could talk about reducing the real estate tax increase request or not moving forward this year. One thing that we all have to realize, though, is that the school district is still facing a $700 to $1 billion deficit over their 5-year plan. So there is much more financial difficulty coming down the pike than just in the next fiscal year for the school district that we're going to have to address as a city, as a community, as a Commonwealth when it comes to education funding. So we'll continue to lobby for those additional resources and could do that in lieu of a real estate tax increase, but it's going to take all of us working together to really address the school district economic problems.
And the irony is that people, complain about real estate taxes and basically they're complaining about the increased value of their property, which I think and I ask people, would you rather your property be worth less than it was the year before, or you're happy that it's worth more? But when it's worth more, the assessment goes up and you pay more in taxes. But people complain to me that, I'm going to move out of the city and I'm moving to the suburbs. And I'm sure since you're in the industry, you're pretty much aware of what the tax levels in the suburbs in New Jersey are relative to real estate. And that's the reason why they have superior schools, because they fund their schools through the real estate taxes, which are high in the surrounding counties in New Jersey, higher than Philadelphia. And I'm not suggesting we be as high as the suburbs in New Jersey, but I do think it's remarkable that, they pay higher real estate taxes in the suburbs in New Jersey and their schools are better because that's how they fund their schools.
Yeah, I think one of the things, though, that we hear a lot from our members and their clients is they feel as though, as you mentioned, property values are increasing around the city, but the assessments were a little, wonky and unpredictable. We know that there were challenges with that. We had the transfer tax increase happened a few years ago. So it kind of feels like it goes back to real estate. It always feels like it goes back to real estate. And, that's why we get that, that pushback from our folks when they go ahead and they see this budget come out. It's like, boom, here we go, real estate again. Groundhog Day, I guess you could say. Well,
real estate tax, obviously, and people get angry when I say this, but real estate tax rates have not been raised. The value of property has been raised, therefore your tax bill is higher, but it's not like there's a real estate tax increase every year. I don't remember when the last one was. But the practical nature of the actual tax bill, the property value is higher than it was 5 years ago.
And we've been working, we've been working for several years on the assessment system. We have the CAMA, the Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal System, which will be in place for the next citywide reassessment we do. And we specifically did not do a citywide reassessment this year, knowing that that CAMA would be coming on next year. So we are working to address the assessment system as well. And that we're looking to improve that every year.
Can I ask you guys a question? Because I'm curious. I'm looking to buy something soon. I'm wondering whether or not real estate values are a lagging indicator of economic issues. Do you expect the value of property to stay the same or continue to rise, or do you expect some reduction in value?
I don't see a reduction in that. I think, we're in the middle of COVID. So like you said, this isn't, we don't have a playbook for this, but prior to going into COVID, there was pent up demand. There was a lack of inventory. So I think now that we are, deemed essential and we're able to, show properties, you start to see a lot more properties come on the market. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of weeks.
Well, should I wait? Should I wait or buy?
Depends on what you're looking for.
Thank you.
I think you have about 115 people in this chat that could help you out.
Thanks.
So speaking of those 115 or so people, we did get questions in from our members. And one of the things, I'm just going to stick along with this budget narrative or line of questioning. Spending has gone up a whole lot for the city over the last number of years, last 4 years. Where does that play in? We have 25% increase over the time when Mayor Nutter left the office of mayor. So of course we know that gets thrown around quite a bit. I know you've heard it before.
Yep. The two major areas of spending increases have been in pensions and in schools. I mean, and that's my commitment when I ran in 2015 was to fund schools and to get our schools into a situation where we don't lose people as a result of the schools being inadequate. I went not recently, about a year or so ago, to opening of a engineering firm that moved into Philadelphia from another state. And a young man came over to me and said he had just bought a house in South Philadelphia. And he told me the neighborhood around 12th and Wharton, 12th and Reed. And I said, well, why did you pick that neighborhood? He said, I picked that neighborhood because of the school. Andrew Jackson School is there, and it was the most impressive school I've seen. And that's where I want my daughter to go. And that was the first time I had heard anybody tell me that they had chosen Philadelphia and chosen a particular neighborhood because of the quality of the school. And you also know that around Meredith, for example, there's bidding wars that go on over houses as a result of Meredith being that good quality school that people want to send their kids to. So my view is that if we continue to try to raise the level of all of our schools, we'll retain more population, we'll reduce poverty, we'll have a more educated and higher earning citizenry. And if we don't do it, it's never going to happen. We're going to continue to spin our wheels and have a failing school system and kids that aren't educated and kids that are living in poverty that will become adults living in poverty if they're not educated. And I know there may be divergent viewpoints on what I just said, but I do believe that education is the key, and the increase in spending did not go, to buy, new toys and things for the government. It went to education and to our pension obligations, which are higher now because we've gotten our employees to put more money into the system than they've ever done before. And we're still, I don't know, Jim, because of COVID, we're still on track for 80% funding, or is that going out the window too?
Yeah, so no, we as of now are still on track to 80% funded by 2030. That was the plan that we laid out several years ago. In relation to the contractual agreements with our unions that required higher pension contributions from police and fire, and a new hybrid pension plan for the non-uniform workforce. And in return for those changes, we agreed as a city to make higher contributions to the pension fund, which is helping us get to that 80% funded mark by 2030 when we're under 50% funded when we started.
And the other issue with the 80% funding is we'll require less money from the general fund to go into the pension fund because it's healthier and funded at an adequate level.
Yeah, there's a crossover effect that happens in several fiscal years as long as we stay on this current track.
So one kind of last question on the budget. So you hand it off to city council and then they start doing their thing and you start hearing all the voices with their latest and greatest ideas.
Yep.
Is there anything you've heard that is actually a good idea that you think could be implemented, and geez, why didn't we think of that?
I don't have any, but the one thing I was totally against and had said very clearly, any playing around with the abatement was really a crazy idea. I think the abatement is misunderstood. I think it doesn't cost anybody anything. It creates development, creates activity, and ultimately those properties go on the tax rolls and they start paying taxes. But the elimination of it would have been a disaster. I think what we wound up with was as best we could get, but I really wish they had not done anything with the tax, because I really do think without it, the city would not be where it is today in relative to development.
Do you foresee anything in the fall revisiting the abatement, given that lost all that time, or is that
it's always going to be a bugaboo. It's always going to be there. If people think somehow doing is like in the best interest of poor people or something, I tell them all the time, I said, when you have a city that has a large number of poor people, you need a large number of rich people living here too, in order to offset some of the needs that those folks have. And if I can afford, an expensive condo in Center City or somewhere else in a trendy neighborhood, I could live in Radnor. I could live in Bryn Mawr. I don't need to live in Philadelphia. But if that incentive's there to bring me and my wife or my family in order for me to spend money if restaurants ever open again, or spend money in shop, all the other things and wage tax and income tax, that's what I think the benefit of the abatement is. And one of the biggest users of the abatement throughout the course of its existence has been the Philadelphia Housing Authority. They have been the biggest user of the 10-year tax abatement than any other developer in the city. And that provides housing for moderate and low income people. So I will fight that. You have my commitment. We'll fight off any attempt to go after the real estate tax abatement again.
I think we used that same argument. We got kind of whacked around during the last council hearings back in the fall around Thanksgiving. We said something about that, and yeah, we kind of that was interesting.
Some folks believe what they want to believe and won't change their mind about anything, even when you present them the facts.
So there's going to be a council hearing later on this week on a 6-pack of bills related to rental properties, tenants' rights, particularly as it relates to what's going on with the pandemic. Our position is that we're against it, as well as the other members of the Real Estate Coalition here in Philadelphia. We were wondering if the administration has taken a position on any or all of those bills, because some of it seems a little bit tough because it's not taking into account at all the folks that actually own the properties, and it's assuming that they have a Brinks truck out back of their house, and that they're not on the hook for anything. And there's pain is being spread across the board here. So I was wondering if the administration had any kind of opinion on those bills.
Ann, you want to handle that?
Sure. So I have to say, I think our viewpoint towards this is evidenced by the programs we've recently stood up. We worked very hard and diligently, and we were able to relatively quickly stand up our rental assistance program. Just to remind folks, the tenants qualify, but the dollars actually go to the landlord. And so we are working through that. We got over 12,000 applications of qualified folks. And we will start getting their detailed income information over the next week. And then there's some information the landlord has to provide, but we hope to start making wire transfers in early to mid-June. And that will cover May, June, and July rent for those folks. And then we may have the ability to continue that on based on need. And in addition, we stood up 2 other programs. They're smaller. We're piloting them. One was to provide working capital to landlords to help cover some of the losses they're occurring right now, so they cover their operations over a period of time to get through the pandemic. And then we also stood up another program that provides loan dollars in order to make some capital improvements, because we know, going back to the Great Recession, a lot of folks lost their lines of credits and their ability to finance things through commercial banks due to banking regulations. So I think the administration has acknowledged that there's 2 sides to that coin, right? That the pandemic has put a lot of stress on renters as our lower income folks are folks most at risk. And we know that they've lost a lot of employment opportunity and income due to COVID. But we also know that the huge proportion, particularly of our affordable housing, is also provided by the private landlord market, and that we need to make sure that we're taking care of our landlords as well as we're taking care of our tenants. Some of those bills include some things around fair housing rights and non-harassment. So I think there's some support for those. But I do believe that the administration's very clearly put out, again, through the programs we've stood up, that there's a balanced approach here, and you need to look at both the tenant and the landlord.
I'm sorry, Ann, just want to get some clarification. Did you say that there was a program related to landlords?
Yes.
Okay.
It's only currently operational in the Kensington area of the city. We're using Impact Services. There's an RFP that we put out a while ago, actually for a different program, right? We put out an RFP for a program that we got some state money for, to provide kind of a line of credit, if you will, for landlords to make capital improvements to their properties. And by capital improvements, I mean things like, you need a new hot water heater or something like that. Because we know that folks lost their ability to get line of credit or small loans because a lot of banks don't feel it's worth the regulatory hurdle to provide those kinds of resources. The landlords came back to us because we basically were able to roll that out right as COVID was starting. And they said, could we kind of through the delivery mechanism also have some sort of a working capital program? And so we said yes. And we quickly stood that up. So that's available. I honestly don't know the zip codes off the top of my head. I'm sure it's probably at the PHDC website. But that's a landlord working capital program. It's, I believe you can own no more than 15 units, and you also have to be providing affordability in those units in order to access it.
Okay, Ann, thank you very much for that. I'm going to shift it over to Stephanie now.
Okay, so we are coming up towards the end of this, and Mr. Mayor, I always like to end it on an optimistic point. So let's think forward. What do you think the city needs to do to move forward after we clear this? And what I mean is, what can we do to bring jobs to the city? And how can the city make the cost of doing business manageable and attractive?
The hardest hit industry, and all of them have been hard hit, has been tourism, hospitality, and restaurants. The sooner we get back, getting that convention center filled, getting our airport back, running at top notch, at top speed, getting our hotels filled again, and the restaurants open is really critical for us to recover, because there's 180,000 people lost their jobs in hospitality, tourism, and restaurants in the city, and a lot of them are not even eligible for some of the unemployment compensation benefits and other things. So the sooner we can get people not afraid to go to a conference or go to a convention. I know that systems may change based on what we're doing here right now. People may be meeting remotely, for a little while, but we need to really get that industry back on its feet, because it does provide so much revenue in so many different ways. That's the major one. The other thing, frankly, is the opportunities that present itself at an area of the city like the old refinery, which is just taken over by a large development company that has developed industrial sites around the country and repurposed them. And what they plan to do is put a logistics hub, warehousing into the space where when you go over the Platte Bridge or the Girard Point Bridge, you can see all the massive metal. That's the thing that blew up last summer. They're going to dismantle that, redevelop the land, and put in warehousing, which will create jobs that are a higher pay level, higher than minimum wage, and into the maybe $20 an hour area. And that's a place for people who do not have college education or are harder to employ, to be able to train those folks to work in those warehouses. We may have it expand. For example, I can see FedEx or somebody expanding, or UPS or Amazon fulfillment center, some of those kinds of things to go onto that land, which will be repurposed away from refinery and towards more employment. That will couple with our port, which the governor and the state has put in a substantial amount of money to put in, I think, 4 new cranes, and the proximity of the port to this logistics hub will be really wonderful for the port and for those kinds of jobs. Longshore, ship unloading jobs and Teamsters, I know they make $30, $40 an hour with benefits, and we've increased our container traffic through the port so far, just with that investment that the state's made, and hopefully with the investment by Hilco at the old PES refinery may be an opportunity for more employment at a higher level of pay. So those are some of the things we've been kind of working on and trying to position for after this is over.
Very good. Okay, lastly, GPAR prides itself on being the voice of real estate. So what can our over 3,000 members do to help going forward?
Lobby I know a few people here don't live in the city, but may live in the surrounding suburbs, to lobby your state legislators and senators on funding education and helping us keep our kids on the right path so they can become an educated, productive workforce. The other issue is to lobby your U.S. House of Representatives folks on giving us more flexibility on whatever money comes out of Harrisburg, so that we can replace some of our lost revenue with the money that will come down from Harrisburg. Right now, the U.S. Senate is being stubborn on any additional expenditures, but we need flexibility so we can use it for what our needs are. And you can be helpful with your U.S. representatives also.
Okay, very good. Well, I just want to thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and Ann and Jim, thank you for your input. I'm sure our members really benefit from all your information, keeping us up to date, and we hope to hear from you soon again.
And let me say, I mean, I want to thank you for what you do too, because we benefit from you as a city. You know, you're motor of the city, or the people who take new residents around to find places to live and keep our neighborhoods vibrant. So thank you for your help and for your patience. I recognize that, you know, none of this is easy, and that you know, it's a tough time for everybody, and we appreciate your patience and we appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you
Mayor.
for
Thank
that.
you. Take
Thanks,
care.
you guys.
you.
Good to see you all. Take care.
Thank you.
And thanks, Jim.
Okay. Well,
right.
thank you everyone for joining. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing it, Stephanie.